You think you know the Boss 429? Most people believe it was Ford's ultimate muscle car, a fire-breathing monster built to dominate the drag strip. But if you thought this legendary Mustang was just another big block bruiser, you're wrong. What you didn't know is that Ford's most exotic muscle car was actually a NASCAR homologation special, packed with bizarre engineering and production quirks that make it unlike any other Mustang ever built. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 20 weird facts about the 1970 Boss 429 that even die-hard Ford fans have never heard, including one that involves the strangest production method ever used for an American muscle car. First 60 series tires in America. The Boss 429 wasn't just powerful. It was the first American production car to wear 60 series tires. Those massive F60 by 15 polyglass Goodyears looked like they belonged on a race car, because essentially they did. Ford knew this beast needed serious rubber to handle all that torque, so they pioneered a tire size that would become the gold standard for performance cars. The sidewalls were so short and stiff that some owners complained about the harsh ride, but Ford didn't care about comfort. This was about putting power to the pavement, and those fat 60 series tires gave the Boss 429 a stance that screamed performance before you even fired up the engine. The tires were so wide that Ford had to modify the wheel wells, creating those distinctive flared fenders that made the Boss look even more menacing. Today, finding original F60 polyglass tires is nearly impossible, and when you do, they cost more than what some people paid for their entire car back in 1970. Only 499 built for 1970. Here's a number that makes collectors weep. Ford built exactly 499 Boss 429s for the 1970 model year. That's it. No more, no less. This wasn't because Ford couldn't sell them. It was because NASCAR required a minimum of 500 cars for homologation, and Ford built exactly what they needed plus a few spares. The 1970 production run was actually smaller than the 859 units built in 1969, making the second-year cars even rarer. Every single one of those 499 cars was documented and tracked, with build sheets that collectors guard like gold. The low production numbers weren't just about meeting NASCAR rules either. The Boss 429 was so expensive and complex to build that Ford was reportedly losing money on every single car. They were essentially hand-built race cars with license plates, and the Brighton assembly process was so labor-intensive that Carcraft could only produce a handful each day. Matte Black Mega Scoop. The 1970 Boss 429 featured the largest hood scoop ever fitted to a production Mustang, and Ford painted it flat black to make it look even more intimidating. This wasn't some decorative add-on either. That massive scoop was fully functional, feeding cold air directly to the hungry 429 engine below. The flat black finish wasn't just for looks, though that was certainly part of it. Ford discovered that the matte finish actually helped reduce glare for the driver, especially important when you're trying to control 475 horsepower on skinny 1970s tire technology. The scoop was so tall that some owners complained about forward visibility. But Ford's response was basically that if you bought a Boss 429 for practical reasons, you bought the wrong car. That giant air intake became such an iconic part of the Boss 429's identity that replica hood scoops are now worth thousands of dollars, and original ones are practically priceless. Hurst T-handle shifter. For 1970, Ford ditched their own shifter linkage and went straight to the best in the business, Hurst. Every Boss 429 came with a Hurst T-handle 4-speed shifter that looked like it was stolen from a drag racer's parts bin. The chrome T-handle wasn't just for show. It provided better leverage for quick shifts, essential when you're trying to keep that big 429 engine in its power band. The Hurst shifter was such an improvement over Ford's previous setup that owners of 1969 models often retrofitted their cars with the newer unit. The throw was short and precise, with that distinctive Hurst click that let you know you'd found the next gear. Ford even included a special boot and chrome trim ring that made the whole setup look like jewelry compared to standard Mustang shifters. This wasn't some option you could order either. If you bought a Boss 429, you got the Hurst period. Mechanical lifter A motor. The 1970 Boss 429 got a significant engine upgrade that most people don't know about. Ford switched from hydraulic to solid lifters, creating what they call the A motor. This wasn't just a minor tweak. The solid lifter cam completely changed the engine's personality, allowing it to rev higher and harder without the valve float that plagued the hydraulic setup. The mechanical lifters required periodic adjustment, something that scared away casual buyers but delighted the hardcore racers who were the Boss's real target market. The solid lifter cam gave the engine a distinctive choppy idle that sounded like barely controlled chaos, which was exactly what it was. Ford's engineers knew that hydraulic lifters were more civilized, but civilization wasn't the goal here. The A motor could spin to 7,000 RPM reliably, a stratospheric number for a big block in 1970, and the solid lifters were a big reason why. Dealer six-pack option existed. Here's a fact that'll blow your mind. Some 1970 Boss 429s left the dealer with triple two-barrel carburetors instead of the standard single four-barrel. This wasn't a factory option, but a dealer-installed setup that turned an already wild engine into something truly insane. The six-pack setup used 3 Holley two-barrels that opened progressively, starting with just the center carb for normal driving, then bringing in the outboards when you mashed the throttle. Only a handful of dealers offered this modification, and even fewer Boss 429 owners opted for it, making these six-pack cars among the rarest muscle cars ever built. The triple carb setup added about 50 horsepower, but required constant tuning and adjustment. Most of these setups have been converted back to single four barrels over the years, but documented six-pack Boss 429s can command prices that would buy you a nice house in most parts of the country. No AC, no automatic. Ford made a lot of options available on the Mustang, but if you wanted a Boss 429, you took what they gave you. That meant no air conditioning and no automatic transmission, ever. This wasn't because Ford was being cheap or difficult. The massive 429 engine filled the engine bay so completely that there simply wasn't room for air conditioning components. As for the automatic transmission, Ford's C6 automatic couldn't handle the Boss 429's torque without expensive modifications, and more importantly, it went against everything the car stood for. This was a pure performance machine, and in Ford's mind, that meant rowing your own gears and sweating when it got hot. Some owners tried to add air conditioning aftermarket, but it usually required relocating so many components that it wasn't worth the effort. The lack of these comfort features is actually a selling point today, as it proves the car's uncompromised performance focus. If you thought that was impressive, wait until you see what's coming up. A trunk-mounted battery that changed weight distribution, a rear sway bar that tamed the beast, secret serial numbers that proved NASCAR heritage, and much more. So let's continue. Trunk-mounted battery from factory Ford relocated the battery to the trunk on every Boss 429. And this wasn't just to make room under the hood. The engineers calculated that moving the battery's weight to the rear improved the car's front-to-rear balance by almost 2%, which might not sound like much until you're trying to launch a 4,000-pound muscle car with 475 horsepower. The trunk-mounted battery came with its own set of challenges, including special heavy-gauge cables that had to run the length of the car and a unique battery box to prevent acid spills. When equipped with the drag pack option, Ford also added an engine oil cooler to keep temperatures under control during quarter-mile runs. The relocated battery became such a signature Boss 429 feature that restorers go to great lengths to ensure the trunk setup is exactly correct. right down to the specific battery hold-down clamps and cable routing that Ford specified. Rear sway bar fitted from new most muscle cars of the era, handled like shopping carts, but the Boss 429 actually came with a competition suspension that included a rear anti-roll bar. This .62-inch bar might seem tiny by modern standards, but in 1970, it was revolutionary for a production muscle car. The rear sway bar worked with the heavy-duty front bar to keep the nose-heavy Boss from plowing through corners like a bulldozer. Ford's engineers knew that stuffing a massive 429 into a Mustang would create handling challenges, so they didn't just beef up the springs and shocks. They actually thought about weight transfer and body roll, concepts that most muscle car manufacturers ignored completely. The competition suspension also included staggered rear shocks to combat wheel hop, heavy-duty springs, and special bushings throughout. It still wasn't a corner carver by any stretch, but at least it could change direction without feeling like the front and rear were in different time zones. Carcraft KK serials. Every Boss 429 carried 2 serial numbers, and the secret one tells the real story. Besides the standard Ford VIN, each car had a Carcraft serial number that started with KK, stamped on a special tag riveted to the driver's door. This wasn't just bureaucratic redundancy. Carcraft in Brighton, Michigan, was the secretive Ford subsidiary that actually built these cars, and they tracked every single unit with their own numbering system. The KK numbers tell historians exactly when each car was built and in what sequence, information that's crucial for authentication today. These tags also carried NASCAR identification, proving the car's homologation status. Many KK tags have been lost or stolen over the years, making intact examples incredibly valuable to collectors. The dual serial number system reflects just how unusual the Boss 429's production really was, essentially a race car builder creating street machines under Ford's umbrella. Built in 2 places. The Boss 429 had the strangest production process of any American muscle car. The body started life at Ford's Dearborn plant, where they were built as regular Mustang sports roofs, then loaded onto trucks and shipped 30 miles to Carcraft in Brighton. There, teams of specialists would cut, weld, and modify each car to accept the massive 429 engine. This 2-stage building process was necessary because the regular Mustang assembly line couldn't handle the extensive modifications required. Carcraft had to relocate the shock towers, modify the inner fenders, install the unique front suspension, relocate the battery, and perform dozens of other changes. Then they'd install the hand-built 429 engine and drivetrain before sending the completed car back to Ford for final inspection and delivery. This bizarre production method is why Boss 429s have so many unique parts and why restoration can be such a nightmare. Parts that look similar to standard Mustang components often have subtle differences that only Carcraft knew about. Born for NASCAR, not the strip. Here's the truth that surprises everyone. The Boss 429 wasn't built to dominate drag strips, it was built to satisfy NASCAR rules. Ford needed to homologate their new semi-Hemi 429 engine for stock car racing, and NASCAR required them to sell at least 500 to the public. The whole project was about getting that exotic engine approved for the track, not creating the ultimate street machine. This explains so many of the car's quirks, from the rev-happy solid lifters to the lack of comfort options. Ford's racing division called the shots, not the marketing department. The irony is that while the Boss 429 was built for NASCAR, it never actually dominated there. The engine was powerful but complex, and teams struggled with reliability. Meanwhile, on the street, owners discovered that their NASCAR homologation special made a pretty incredible drag racer, even if that wasn't Ford's original intention. 1970 Front End Makeover. The 1970 Boss 429 looked dramatically different from its 1969 predecessor, thanks to a complete front-end redesign. Gone were the four headlights and fake quarter scoops of 1969, replaced by a cleaner twin headlight design with functional corner air intakes. The new front end wasn't just about looks. Those corner intakes actually fed cooling air to the front brakes, addressing a problem that plagued the 69 models on racetracks. The simpler grille design also improved airflow to the radiator, crucial for keeping that massive 429 cool in traffic. Many enthusiasts actually prefer the 1970s cleaner styling, arguing that it looks more purposeful and less cluttered than the 69. The redesign also included a new rear-end treatment that eliminated some of the fake scoops and trim, creating a more serious, business-like appearance that matched the car's true mission. Have you ever seen one of these incredible machines in person? Let me know in the comments what you think about Ford's wildest muscle car. 5 grabber colors. Only Ford offered the 1970 Boss 429 in just 5 colors, and they all had names that sounded like they came from a psychedelic poster shop. Grabber Blue, Grabber Green, and Grabber Orange were the high-impact choices, while Calypso Coral and Pastel Blue offered slightly more subdued options. Notice anything missing? That's right, no black, no white, no silver, no basic colors at all. Ford wanted every Boss 429 to stand out, and subtle wasn't in the vocabulary. The grabber colors were specially formulated with extra metallic content to really pop in the sunlight, and they become so associated with the Boss 429 that other muscle cars painted in these shades often get mistaken for the real thing. Interior choices were limited to black or white, creating some wild combinations like Grabber Orange with white interior that looked like a creamsicle on steroids. Today, these original high-impact colors are so valuable that some owners refuse to drive their cars in the rain, fearing even the smallest chip or scratch. Biggest engine ever in a Mustang. The 429 cubic inch V8 remains the largest displacement engine ever stuffed into a production Mustang, and it's a record that will never be broken. Modern engines make more power from less displacement, but there's something primal about 7 liters of American V8 that no turbocharger can replicate. The engine was so large that Ford engineers had to get creative just to make it fit, including using a special thin wall casting technique for the block to save space. Even then, the fit was so tight that changing spark plugs required the patience of a saint and the flexibility of a contortionist. The massive displacement wasn't just about bragging rights, though those certainly mattered. The 429's huge bore and stroke created tremendous low-end torque that could break tires loose at virtually any speed. It's the kind of effortless power that modern engines achieve through technology, but the Boss 429 did it through sheer cubic inches. Costliest non-Shelby of its day. The Boss 429 carried a price tag that made accountants weep and insurance agents faint. At around $4,800, it was the most expensive non-Shelby Mustang you could buy in 1970. To put that in perspective, you could buy 2 base Mustangs for the price of one Boss 429. The high price wasn't just Ford padding their profits either. Remember, they were reportedly losing money on each car due to the complex car-craft assembly process. Buyers were essentially paying for a hand-built race car, and even at that steep price, Ford couldn't cover their costs. The Boss 429's price tag put it in competition with Corvettes and other premium performance cars, a market segment where Mustangs didn't usually play. But Ford didn't care about sales volume. They needed exactly 500 cars to go NASCAR racing, and they priced them accordingly. Magnum 500s with F60s, the Boss 429 rolled on 15 by 7-inch Magnum 500 wheels wrapped in those pioneering Goodyear Polyglass F60 15s, a combination that looked absolutely massive by 1970 standards. The Magnum 500s weren't just any wheels. They were specially reinforced versions designed to handle the Boss's tremendous torque without flexing or cracking. The chrome finish and distinctive center caps made them instant classics, and original date-coated Magnum 500s are now worth more than many complete cars. The F60 tires were equally special, with a unique compound and construction that Goodyear developed specifically for high-performance applications. The wide footprint and short sidewalls provided incredible grip for the era, though by modern standards, they'd seem hopelessly inadequate for controlling 475 horsepower. The wheel and tire combination gave the Boss 429 its characteristic wide track stance that made it look ready to pounce even when parked. Semi-hemi crescent heads. The Boss 429's aluminum heads featured a unique crescent combustion chamber design that was almost hemispherical, earning them the nickname semi-hemi or blue crescent heads. These weren't just modified production heads, they were purpose-built racing components with massive valves and ports that could flow enough air to support well over 600 horsepower. The aluminum construction saved weight and dissipated heat better than iron, crucial advantages for both street and track use. Each head featured valves so large that Ford had to cant them at different angles just to make them fit, creating that crescent-shaped chamber. The heads breathed through a 735 CFM Holley 4-barrel that looked almost comically small, perched atop the massive intake manifold. These exotic heads are now among the most sought-after Ford performance parts ever made, with good original examples commanding prices that would make your mortgage payment look reasonable. Dry deck, no head gaskets. Here's the weirdest fact about the Boss 429 engine. It didn't use conventional head gaskets. Instead, Ford sealed the heads to the block using O-rings in a dry deck design that kept the coolant systems in the block and heads completely separate. This racing-derived technology was virtually unheard of in street cars and required special assembly techniques that only trained technicians could perform correctly. The O-ring system provided a superior seal under extreme conditions, but made field repairs virtually impossible. If you blew a head seal, you couldn't just slap on a new gasket and go. The whole engine had to be carefully disassembled and the O-rings replaced with exactly the right compression. This exotic sealing system is one reason why Boss 429 engines are so expensive to rebuild correctly today. Many have been converted to conventional head gaskets over the years, but purists insist on maintaining the original dry deck design. Fewer unique parts in 1970. While the 1969 Boss 429 was almost entirely bespoke, Ford got smart for 1970 and shared more components with the Boss 302. This wasn't cost-cutting, it was Ford learning from experience. The 1969's ultra-specialized parts had created service nightmares, with dealers unable to get replacement components for months. By adopting the Boss 302's proven suspension pieces where possible, Ford made the 1970 cars more reliable and easier to service. The shared components included control arms, springs, and various bushings that had already proven themselves in competition. This parts commonality is actually a blessing for restorers today, as Boss 302 components are far easier to find than unique Boss 429 pieces. However, Ford still had to use plenty of model-specific parts, especially in the engine bay, where nothing from the parts bin would fit around that massive 429. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss the next one. See you there.